Okay, great. So today we are going to be doing chapter 35 of Second Chronicles, and it's about Josiah. So Josiah covers two chapters in Second Chronicles, chapter 34 and chapter 35. And so today is Josiah doing the Passover. So the last time we read about the Passover was with Hezekiah. Hezekiah celebrated the Passover, and really those were the two kings that made a big deal of it. So and there were three feasts that the Lord had instructed the people of Israel to celebrate. First one was the Feast of Passover. The next one was the Feast of Weeks, which was, I think, 7 weeks on. And then there was the Feast of Tabernacles, which would have been celebrated in around September, which would have been, in and around the beginning of the civil year, not the beginning of the religious year, but the beginning of the civil calendar year. So now the Jews would have then developed other feasts as a result of certain portions of their history. So the time of Esther, when the Lord delivered the people out of the hands of Haman and all that crowd, they then had the Feast of Purim. So, but that was not an original feast of the Lord that the Lord had designated to the children of Israel from the book of the law. And then there was a wintertime feast that we would know as Hanukkah. And that's set in around Christmas time. So, but those two feasts, Purim and Hanukkah, were not designated in the law. And the ones that were in the law was the Feast of Passover and unleavened bread, and then the Feast of Weeks, and then the Feast of Tabernacles. So anyway, but the ones that are really emphasized in terms of what the kings celebrated was Passover, because that was the feast. That was the most important thing. Now, it's not to say that they didn't celebrate the other feasts. They likely did, especially Josiah, because when Josiah read the Bible, he realized that he realized what he wasn't doing. And so he took great care to then pay attention to what was happening. So, right, what's happening here? Let's see, we get a okay. So the Reformation that Josiah was doing in chapter 34, which he did in stages. Remember, he became king when he was 8 years old, and then when he was 16, he started to seek God, and then when he was 24, I think it was, he started doing more reformations, get rid of the idols and all these sorts of things. So he was sort of stage by stage, developing a good walk with God. And so then in the 18th year of his reign, he gets Passover in the year. So that's when he is 26. All right. So the Reformation then leads to this culmination of the Remembrance Feast, because that's what Passover is all about, is remembering how the Lord delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt. So we'll look at these first 6 verses here. So it says, "Now Josiah kept a Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem, and they slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th day of the first month. And he set the priests in their duties and encouraged them for the service of the house of the Lord. And then he said to the Levites who taught all Israel, who were holy to the Lord, put the holy ark in the house which Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel, built. It shall no longer be a burden on your shoulders. Now serve the Lord your God and his people Israel. Prepare yourselves according to your fathers' houses, according to your divisions, following the written instructions of David, king of Israel, and the written instruction of Solomon his son, and stand in the holy place according to the divisions of the fathers' houses of your brethren, the lay people, and according to the divisions of the fathers' houses of the Levites. So slaughter the Passover offerings, consecrate yourselves, prepare them for your brethren, that they may do according to the word of the Lord by the hand of Moses." So A lot of sort of technical stuff there, but really what Josiah is very aware of is that if you remember toward the end of chapter 34, what's Hilkiah find along with your other boy? What was his name? Shaphan, the scribe. They find the book of the law in the temple. You know, that's when they're clearing it out, you know, and they come out and they remember, oh, I found the book. Oh, a book, right, great. But it was in that book, in the book of the law, that they find all this information about what they should have been doing. So, yes, yeah. So now, just to ask you all a couple of questions here. The first verse there, it says, now Josiah kept the Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem, and they slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th day of the first month. Compare that to what you would remember about what Hezekiah did. Does anybody remember when Hezekiah celebrated the Passover? It was during the second month. Okay, so the Passover, the instruction about the Passover was that you celebrated on the 14th day of the first month of the religious year, because God had said in Exodus, this shall be the beginning of months to you. And so that was the first thing that was done. Now, the reason Hezekiah didn't celebrate it on the first month was because basically there were a lot of people that couldn't get down in time. So he celebrated it the second month, which there was provision in the law to do that. Okay. So, but then it says there about taking the ark, which is where the 10 Commandments would have been stored. So the ark was that box that was about 3.5 or about 4 foot long and a couple of feet or 1.5 feet wide or so. And then there was the mercy seat that had the 2 angels facing each other. It was overlaid with gold and made of acacia wood and so on. And so that during the reign of terror of Manasseh and his son Ammon, or Ahaz rather, sorry, the ark likely had been pulled out of the temple and stored somewhere or put somewhere so that it would be safe. So because Manasseh and his son, they just went in and put all kinds of idols and stuff in the temple and just trashed the place. So that's why it says there in verse 3, put the holy ark in the house which Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel, built. It should no longer be a burden on your shoulders, you know, because the ark would have been carried by poles by the priests and a certain tribe of priests, or not tribe, but family of priests. And so the thing was basically either stored somewhere else or being kind of carted, not carted, but, you know, taken around to other locations in order to be safe. And so what Josiah is doing is he's saying, look, let's bring the ark back into the temple because that's where it belongs. So so a lot of action words here. Prepare yourselves, you know, stand in the holy place, you know, slaughter the Passover offerings. You know, this is all procedure that Josiah has found as instructions in the law. So now let's just read these couple of verses. And then Josiah gave the lay people lambs and younger goats from the flock, all the Passover offerings for all who were present, to the number of 30,000, as well as 3,000 cattle, and these were from the king's possessions. And his leaders gave willingly to the people, to the priests and to the Levites, Hilkiah, Zechariah, Jehiel, rulers of the house of God, gave to the priests for the Passover offerings 2,600 from the flock and 300 cattle. Also Conaniah, his brother Shemaiah, and Nethanel, Hashabiah, and Jehiel, and Josabad. That one was a little easier to pronounce. Chief of the Levites gave to the Levites for Passover offerings 5,000 from the flock and 500 cattle. So again, anytime there's names being thrown into the mix here, that's important. So, right, let's look at some notes about this here. So, oops. This thing is actually filming on me. So this Passover was better than Hezekiah's Passover. Okay, because later on it says that there was no Passover like it, not since the time of the judges. So, so three things. It was celebrated in the first month, not the second month. Okay, that was preferred. Okay, because God says this is the beginning of months for you, and which demonstrates the priority of the feast. I mean, God actually changed the calendar system.
Yeah, that's why it's good. This is not January in our.
No. This is like April.
Yes.
Okay, the Passover happens the first full moon after the first day of spring. Okay, which is how they calculate Easter. Okay, so because it would be the first full moon, Sunday after the first full moon after the first day of spring. So that's why Easter is always on a different date. Okay, so but Passover always had to have a full moon on it, because the Jewish calendar was based on a lunar system. Okay, so really every 30 days, roughly, the moon would orbit the Earth. So that's why every month basically had 30 days. Now the problem with that is that a calendar year or a solar year, as we would understand it, is not 360 days. It's 365 days. So what the Jews did was, because they understood this, because there was then a thing that came out of sequence, because basically you had a solar year that was 5 days longer than your year that you were operating on. Okay. Incidentally, the moon orbits the Earth every 29 days and 12 hours. So there's a slight difference there as well. So, and a solar year is not exactly 365 days. It's 365 days, 5 hours and 54 minutes. So now the reason that you then have a leap day, okay, for the leap year, which the 29th of February, is because of that 5 hours and 54 minute thing, which is close enough to 6 hours. So 6 times 4 is 24. That gives you a day. So every 4 years, you add a day.
Only the boom after on it. So just boom after and everything.
Yes. Oh no, that would be a lot easier
For me anyway.
Yeah, sure. So that if we only had metric time, but 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour and all that stuff, that is all based on a Babylonian system. That's where all that comes from, because the Babylonians, we have a base 10 system. We have 0 through 9, and then it goes to 10, but 10 is 2 digits.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what's referred to as base 10. The Babylonians had a base 60 system, so they had a character for 0 through 59, the different characters. Very complicated. I think the Egyptians used a base 12 system. So computers, incidentally, use base 16. So computers do not count decimally. Now, there's a reason for that, is because computers are very inherently stupid devices, and they only operate on a light being on or a light being off, or a switch being on or a switch being off. That's on the basis of two then, because you can only have one of two states. So that all has to be combined and pulled together and made some kind of logic out of it. Computers like this, for instance, are based on 64-bit architecture, which means it uses a 60, no, never mind.
I think it was good, but
Yeah, so, it's, if you see these kinds of things, when you're going and buying computers, they will say, well, you want a 64-bit computer or a 32-bit system? It's like, and if you know nothing about that, you think, oh, well, 64 sounds better than 32,
Yes.
but that's all based on the power of two and all this stuff. So I used to study all these things, so
just tell me what the Commodore 64 now.
yeah, there we go, something from the 1980s,
So I'll just walk over the shop.
Yeah. So I remember when my father had a Commodore 128. So that was a few years back. So anyway, where did this go? Right. All right. Second month. Okay. So Hezekiah or Josiah's Passover was better because he was doing it on the first month.
Hezekiah did it on the second month, did it?
Hezekiah did it on the second month. Yeah. So and then everyone participated. Some in Hezekiah's time didn't come. Remember, there was an invitation that was sent out, and people, especially in Israel, were like, yeah, go and sling the hook. We're not coming. So there was no spiritual sort of interest with people in the north, because basically they've been led by, dopey kings for years and years and years, and not doing godly things. Now, there were people up there, during Ahab's time, if you remember, Elijah, thought he was the only one left. And then God says, no, you're not the only one left. There's 7,000 in Israel that have not bowed the knee to Baal. So there was at least 7,000 men. So that didn't include their children and wives, so there's a whole thousands of them up north, So there were leftovers of people up there that had not been deported into Syria. So the invitation was sent out. Some laughed and mocked the people and says, no, we're not coming. But then there was others that came down to Jerusalem to participate. Whereas with Josiah, everybody that was there was participating. So, and even people farther afield were coming down and making it on time.
We're thinking back in the days, we're just like the way people would think now.
Uh-huh.
You could really,
sure.
Just think of examples of that,
Mm-hmm.
In this day and age.
Oh, sure. Yeah, people then don't prioritize the things of God. They think it's far more important to go and play golf or I have a football match on, so therefore I can't. It's then it turns into all the excuses of when Jesus was telling the parable of the great feast. And saying, all things are ready, come to the great feast. And then, he sends out to those who are invited. And what do? They get excuses. I've got 5 yoke of oxen, so I have to go and try them out. I bought a piece of land, so I have to go and see it. I've married a wife, so, I'm sorry, I can't come. So at least the excuse wasn't, I've married a wife, now I'm going to have to go and meet her. The first 2 excuses were bad enough, but anyway, so and then there was everyone was consecrated. Some in Hezekiah's time were not cleansed. Remember the prayer that Hezekiah made for the people on behalf of the people, and said, look, some of the people haven't gotten this right, but God intercede for them, or Hezekiah interceded on their behalf. And God listened to their prayer. So, so Hezekiah, he understood that what he was dealing with was not a perfect situation. So he did what he could, and God worked with that, So, I sit with guys, each day, and it's a mess, and you have to deal with what you find, and so. Okay, so, and it was done entirely by the book of the law, because Josiah found the book, read the entirety of the book, and did what the book said. Now, I have to say that there was probably some aspects of it that he may have not implemented fully, just because of some comments that the end of Second Chronicles makes. But anyway, I would say the vast majority of it was adhered to. So, but in regard to the Passover, everything was done according to the book. So, okay, now, it did say in that second paragraph that we looked at that Josiah and the leaders, those were, some of the priests and Levites and those guys, gave of their flocks to all who were present. Now, I found that very interesting as I read it. Now, what I tend to do with the Bible and when I read these passages is I don't just read them once and then do the Bible study. I probably read the passage probably in excess of 10 times, and praying and asking God and saying, Lord, show me something here that, I'm not going to see necessarily by reading commentaries. Now, commentaries can help, they can bring out certain things that you don't see, but again, in your own personal study, read, and read it again. Because God will bring something to you that will make a difference to you, as an individual.
Well, is that the thing, like, when someone reads the Bible and another person maybe in a different situation is praying about something that could they both read two portions of scripture and God tell them something different about it?
Yes, that's,
Yeah, I think so, because the word of God is a living book, and so it comes from a living God, so it can then be in a very quickening way applied to you in a way that is particular to you, so now some people, what they do when they read the Bible, especially if they're in the throes of making a decision about something rather heavy, is then their awareness is heightened by the book, and then they go, right, okay, I'm looking for something where God will tell me to do this, and then you basically just nearly invent, you happen upon a verse, there it is, so, but, that's how cults come into being,
So after the endorphins going like now.
But how I got led into the work of stars was through Deuteronomy 1:6, where God says to the children of Israel, "You spent enough time around this mountain." Now God used that and just lifted it off the page, put a big green streak around the thing, and says, "This is your green light to go to Ireland."
I have had it where I couldn't deny that God spoke to me, the one the other hand, we just couldn't deny.
So, but as we've done in the Bible study, we've also been very, very careful to look at things in its context, and understanding it in its context, because it is then easy to go. Remember when we did Second Chronicles 7:14. Which says, my people who are called by name humble themselves and it says, I will heal their land and all these kinds of things. Now, when we looked at that, a lot of people in this day and age would go and grab that verse and say, yeah, that's all about COVID and God's going to heal our land and all this crap, and no, not necessarily. Now you look at those verses and you look about what it talks about in terms of the character of God. Character of God doesn't change, so you can apprehend those particular promises. But that stuff about healing the land, that was for them at that time. That was a physical thing. So that has nothing to do with Northern Ireland or the West or any of these kinds of things. I think when time comes for the Lord to return, I think the West is going to be greatly degraded. you know, so, and
We're getting there quickly.
quick, so anyway. So anyway, Josiah and the leaders gave of their flocks to all who were present. Now, the reason I felt that this was important was because, and again, you know, reading through the scriptures here and getting the breadth of it, you then start to remember what happened with certain other stories. Okay, so now, to me, Josiah was a picture of Christ in the sense that he had the capacity to give, and he gave willingly. You know, if you look back at that passage there, it says, then Josiah gave the lay people lambs and young goats from the flock, all the Passover offerings were all present, who were from the king's possessions. So Josiah realized that there were loads of people that didn't have capacity to offer their own sacrifices. So he gave it to them. And to me, that's a picture of what Christ does, because Christ looks at our lives and he says, you do not have the wherewithal or the capacity to actually do anything. So I will give it to you.
The king, was very understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Because like he had authority, he could have.
Yeah, I said, well, sure, if you don't have a sacrificial animal, then you're done. But he wanted everybody to participate in this, and there was requirements for that. You know, so and he couldn't sort of forego the requirements. He couldn't say to the poor person, oh well, sure, you come along. Don't bring anything with you because you can't pay for it, so we'll just ignore it. No, there's an entrance fee. So now, in contrast with David, who was offered a sacrifice at no cost to himself. Remember back in the days when he was purchasing the land of the threshing floor of Onan, I think it was. And a guy came along and he says, look, I have all these sheep and sacrifices, you can have them at no cost. And so, but David says, how shall I sacrifice that which costs me nothing?
Right.
So David, again, being a picture of Christ, the resources cannot be from outside himself. The resources have to be from him. So, you know, when the Lord Jesus Christ died for us on the cross, he gave himself completely. So that's why we have Jesus gave entirely out of his own resources so that we could have the right sacrifice to offer to God. And so that's what I got out of that little bit there. And again, that was from reading, and then reflecting back to David, because David, you know, he could have gotten, you know, a freebie basically out of this rich man, but then that wouldn't have been a sacrifice. So, so you know, there's some very, very interesting things I think that you can glean out of this and really appreciate then, you know, what Christ has done on our behalf, because he realizes that we have no resource, we have no ability. He then gives willingly, gives completely to you and says, here you go. Now you can participate in worship because you have what you need. So praise the Lord for that.
So wasteful.
Yeah. So, you know, and there wasn't any sort of dickering about and messing around, you know, it was, you know, these people, you know, along with Josiah, the other leaders that we will then go through and talk about here in a second, you know, they gave, you know, very willingly of themselves from their own stuff, you know, so that everybody could participate in this remembrance feast. Now, so the right men involved as the givers. Okay, so these are the giving people. Now, it is interesting that all these men, every last one of them has either the name of the Lord or the name of God embedded in it. So there's no name there that is, just a kind of Joseph sort of name. So the first guy is Hilkiah, which we've seen earlier, and his name means my portion is the Lord. So, here's a man who has an ability now to give because the Lord is what he's about. So you can only give spiritually if the Lord is your portion. Because if we try to give of ourselves and God is not the mainstay of who we are, then you will not be able to give anything meaningful in spiritual terms to anybody. So that's a great name. Yeah. Okay, Zechariah. There's lots of Zechariahs in the Bible, so this is a fairly common name, but it says, but it means the Lord remembers. Okay, so this is very appropriate for this kind of feast because this is about remembrance.
Yeah.
And then there's Jehiel, okay, which simply means God lives. So we don't serve a dead God. So the first three there, I think the battery started to go on this puppy. The first three was in the first list, okay, and then the next set here, it was the second list in the next verse. So there was Konaniah, which means the Lord has sustained or established. So again, thinking about how Josiah was then giving of his own flocks and of his own possessions, his own resources. Konaniah's name, kind of reflects that because it's the Lord who does this. It's the Lord who supplies the ability to maintain and to be established. And then there's Shemaiah. Shem is the Hebrew word for here. Okay, the ayah then on the end is the Lord. The great confession of faith in Deuteronomy, which says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength." That is the great confession of faith, and that is what is referred to by the Jews as the Shema. Okay, so Shema there, so that's hear, heard, hear Israel. So in Hebrew it's Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Ishad. So how important it is then that the Lord hears what is going on. So what that means is that God is engaged with you. God's not just some inanimate object out there that you just kind of make a sacrifice to and hope it hits some kind of button somewhere. God hears. God hears your worship. He hears your cry. He hears what you're offering. And then there's Nathanael, which is sort of similar to the word Nathan, which means gift. Okay, and then the L on the end of that is short for Elohim, which is for God. So given by God. Well, again, this reflects exactly what's going on because God is supplying these things for you in order to be able to worship properly. Okay, Hashabiah, the Lord has considered or regarded, and it also has an idea of to weave into. So, so in other words, God's desire in your life is not to be some part of your life. His desire is to be fully integrated and woven into the fabric of your life, so that everywhere you look, you see there's God.
Yeah. It's like the potter.
There's God. Yeah. So if you look at any of your clothes, you see fabric. Okay. Well, just think that every strand that is woven into that makes up that fabric. So if God is then woven into your life, then you can't help but to express God. Now, it's a real challenge, because there's a lot of us out there that probably have various sorts of articles of clothing where, in a sense, God's not woven into them.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Especially for a woman.
Well, yeah, that man, whatever, so kids. So, Jehiel, God sweeps or carries away. Kind of interesting name there too, because really there's no room for other things. Josiah, what he did was he cleansed things. He got rid of the idols and all that kind of stuff. So you can't have God and your idol that's sitting in the same place. So the idol has to be carried away. It has to be swept away. And but who gave them the impetus to do that? God. This is a pause.
They're still online. So years.
Code. Right.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to survey the sewers outside. Okay, now the last one, Josiah. This means the Lord has endowed or placed upon. So, so here's a man that represents, God has basically put it into your mind. He has given this this situation to be acted upon. So when you look at those another nine men, you can see that this makes sense. These are the right men to give. So so you can take those ideas and say, okay, if I'm going to give, then I need to have these kinds of hallmarks within myself.
But there's not one person there that has negativity towards them. They're all good, solid people, and that works.
Yeah.
Whenever you're
And every one of them has God or the Lord in their name. Okay, right. Right, let's just look at the rest of this stuff about the Passover. So, so as a result of getting all these things into place, then the Passover is completed. So, 2 Chronicles 35, 10 to 19, two biggest sections here. So the service was prepared, and the priests stood in their places, and the Levites in their divisions according to the king's command, and they slaughtered the Passover offerings, and the priests sprinkled the blood with their hands while the Levites skinned the animals. Then they removed the burnt offerings that they might give them to the divisions of the fathers' houses of the lay people to offer to the Lord, as it is written in the book of Moses. So, here's another one of these statements here, as it is written in the book. So, this is all done by the book. And so they did with the cattle. They also roasted the Passover offerings with fire according to the ordinance. But the other holy offerings, they boiled in pots and cauldrons and pans and divided them quickly among all the lay people. And then afterward, they prepared portions for themselves and for the priests, because the priests, the sons of Aaron, were busy in offering burnt offerings and fat until night. Therefore, the Levites prepared portions for themselves and for the priests and the sons of Aaron. And the singers were the sons of Asaph, who were in their places according to the command of David, Asaph, Haman, him, begins with J, the king Seir. So this is reflecting upon David's people, okay, back many years earlier. And also the gatekeepers were at each gate, and they did not leave their position because their brethren, the Levites, prepared portions for them. So I think that's a nice line there, because they're at a place, they're doing their job, and can't get to where they maybe think they should be, but they're doing their job. So their brethren are supplying for them.
Yeah, nobody was forgotten.
Nobody was forgotten. So all the service of the Lord was prepared the same day to keep the Passover and burnt offerings on the altar of the Lord according to the command of King Josiah. And the children of Israel who were present kept the Passover at that time and the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days. See, Passover is one particular day, okay, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread is then celebrated for the 7 days. Okay, it's all part of the same feast, but it's it goes on for that week. Now, listen to verse 18. In fact, what I will do is I will highlight it for you. There had been no Passover kept in Israel like that since the days of Samuel the prophet, and none of the kings of Israel had kept such a Passover as Josiah kept, with the priests and the Levites, all Judah and Israel who were present, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was kept.
So really, as a king, was he was a better king than Hezekiah?
Yes, in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
because he kept the Passover more regimented, in a more regimented way. So I think Hezekiah really was playing a lot of catch up.
Yes.
So he did his best.
Well, he was a good king, wasn't he? Like,
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Hezekiah.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. No, we don't want to go down the line of saying, Hezekiah was like less of a king than Josiah.
I'm on all the way up. Yeah. So
Yeah. Well, you see, Manasseh and Ahaz, they undid everything.
They didn't really obey the Lord's commandment.
No. Now, Manasseh did return to God as an individual,
Right.
when he was, because he cried out to God when he was in captivity in Assyria. And then God restored him back to his political place, but that was him as an individual.
Yes.
He did not really, the rest of the people acted corruptly and just carried on with their stuff. So, and then his son, sort of didn't sort of do much of anything either, other than lead the people astray. But I mean, to look at that line there and say, there had been no Passover kept in Israel since the days of Samuel. Now that's before David.
Yeah.
That's before David. That's serious. That's a very, very serious statement. So really Josiah really got the finger out and did this right. Now, he did refer back to how David and Solomon had put in certain procedures and things like that, but there must have been a real fervor, amongst the people, because it says here, Josiah kept with the priests and the Levites, all Judah and Israel who were present, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So, everybody was involved, and everybody was involved willingly. There was no compunction or compulsion or, any of that stuff. So, so this was in the 18th year of the reign of Josiah. That means that Josiah was 26. Okay, so you can think of a 26-year-old who's taking the bull by the horns, literally, and
Yeah.
doing it right. So, how many 26-year-olds do we know in our day and age that have this kind of fervor? Now, just to finish up this chapter, then we need to deal with the death of Josiah. Okay, this is how this chapter ends, which unfortunately ends on a bit of a downer. So we've really had no king here that has really ended on an upbeat note. Now, okay, after all this, okay, so here's a transitional statement. Okay, after all this, meaning after all the stuff with the Passover, and because this is now running up to the death of Josiah, Josiah reigned for 31 years. So this initial Passover was in his 18th year, so that there was then another 13 years, right, after this. Okay, so my reckoning is that because this was a yearly feast, that Josiah continued this, okay, for that period of time. So things were good. But then we have this challenge, which really at the end of the day wasn't really a challenge. He just made it his challenge. So after all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho, king of Egypt, so that's a pharaoh from down southwest, okay, came up to fight against Karshemish by the Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. Now, let me give you a bit of context and understanding of what this is about, because 2 Kings gives more detail on what's happening here. Necho is an Egyptian king, all right. In this time, there are two major powers. There's the Egyptians in the southwest, and there's the Assyrians up north of Israel, where their capital would have been Nineveh, which is where Jonah went and spoke to them and stuff. Okay, now there was an up and coming power called Babylon. Assyria was starting to degrade a bit and starting to lose a bit of ground and a little bit of prominence and influence with other kingdoms around them, because a lot of the ways that they financed themselves is they would go and bully everybody that was around them and basically say, you pay us taxes, so that shores up that sort of political system, you know. So Egypt was starting to falter a bit too. So Necho then kind of says, right, I'm going to go up and I'm going to help the Assyrians to fight against the Babylonians, because the Babylonians are the new kid in the block, and they're coming up and they're sticking their chest out, and they're just like, we're gonna take over here, you know, and be the big boys. So so that's what's happening. So Karshemish, by the Euphrates River goes straight down the middle of Iraq today. Okay, so there's the Tigris River and the Euphrates River, and you know, and those rivers have been fought over for thousands of years because it's water. Okay, water is power. Right? If you have access to water, you got power. Okay, so now where a lot of these rivers start is up in modern day Turkey. So Turkish people, you know, and the Kurds and all them people up there, they're all like, yeah, we're in the headwaters of these rivers and we can make some lakes, and stop the water coming down their way, and you know, so you know, it's all this carry on that's been going on for centuries. All right. So the Euphrates, that's where Babylon is. So
they're fighting then.
So what's happening is Egypt is bringing all their troops up the Mediterranean, sort of landing just in the northern parts of Israel, and then cutting across into Syria, getting all their people and saying, let's all go together to Karshemish and beat the Babylonians down.
Right.
Now, Josiah probably sees this as a threat to his own security, but really it isn't, because he's down south. He's in the southern reaches, and so this is what goes on. So Josiah then goes out against them, but he sent messengers to him, meaning Necho, okay, saying, what have I to do with you, king of Judah? I have not come against you this day, but against the house with which I have war, meaning the Babylonians.
Yeah.
Okay, not him.
Yeah.
For God commanded me to make haste, refrain from meddling with God who is with me, lest he destroy you. Now that's kind of strange language coming from a pagan.
Yeah.
But what you have to realize is that Chronicles is about how God works. And so God can very, very easily speak through an unsaved individual because he's able to speak through Balaam's donkey. You know, so, you know, and even in the Gospels, you read about Caiaphas in the Gospel of John, where it says, and Caiaphas did not say this on his own authority, but God put it in his mouth about one person dying for the people.
That's another example.
Yeah, so you know, and God puts it into the mouths of unsaved men to actually explain the word of God. So anyway, so you know, some people would look at this and find this a bit sort of strange. You know, it's like, how can that happen? You know, because Necho's an ungodly man. But basically, you know, God is speaking to Josiah and saying, don't be shoving your oar into this thing. This is a problem between two pagan individuals. They're getting on stupid and they're doing silly things. I'm in charge of it. Don't get yourself involved in it. It's not your problem.
But he did.
He did. Okay. So nevertheless, verse 22, it says, Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguised himself so that he might fight with him, and did not heed the words of Necho from the mouth of God. Okay, so it is very, very clear in this passage that this information that he is getting from Necho is from God. Now, I think the lesson here, you know, for us is it's tempting. You know, it's interesting. I don't know if you've seen up in Belfast there, but they have this big conference about bystanders and people that see a situation that might be violent or difficult or something like this. And so when does the bystander get involved? Okay, so now I think every situation has its own merit, you know, and so, but there is a propensity with some people to go, well, there's nothing to do with me. So, you know, and you walk away from it. But there might be, you know, a reason why you should get involved, especially if there's kind of, you know, somebody is getting hurt or there's some sort of criminal activity or something, you know, you need to go in and intervene some way. But sometimes within even a Christian context, or even in a non-Christian context, if you see a situation that you know has nothing to do with you, we're tempted to go and interject our opinion. And it has nothing to do with you. But then you fire your oar into it, and then you get stuck into it. Yeah, and then it becomes your problem. So, interesting word there. Refrain from meddling with God. So,
That's a warning to us.
yeah. And so I think we need to be very, very careful and very aware when we see something that we, perceive as to be, oh, see them people getting on and think. Now, you don't know the facts.
Right.
You don't know all what's going on. Josiah didn't know all what was going on. He didn't need to. And God was telling him very, very clearly, don't be sticking yourself into this thing. So, because within, leadership ranks within church and that kind of stuff, we may hear bits and pieces and then we go, oh, I heard such and such and so, I know things and I think I can help, and so you go and shove yourself into it. And then it turns into a dog's dinner. Let the people do what they need to do, let God sort it out, because God sorting it out is a lot better than you trying to sort it out yourself. So, unless you are brought into it because you do have something meaningful to contribute to it, So, but Josiah had nothing meaningful to contribute to the situation. Other than he got himself stuck into it. And guess what? And the archers shot King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, take me away, for I'm severely wounded. And the servants took him out of that chariot and put him in the second chariot that he had, and they brought him to Jerusalem. And so he died and was buried in one of the tombs of his fathers, and all Judah and Jerusalem mourned for Josiah.
He just made a wrong move.
Yeah.
He just did not listen to God.
He went and meddled in a situation that was none of his business, and he was told by God that you shouldn't be doing this. So back off. Not his problem. So, so we ask ourselves the questions, how many problems have we gone and inserted ourselves into, and it has become then our problem, whereas originally it wasn't our problem at all.
It just turns into a mess.
Yeah. So, and this is, again, to talk with people and then they think, oh, I need to exercise vengeance. I need to, that's unjust what has happened. So I know what to do. So you go and you do that, and then it really gets bad. So, now, Jeremiah, this is Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah, also lamented for Josiah, and to this day, all the singing men and singing women speak of Josiah in their lamentations, and they made it a custom in Israel. Indeed, are they written in the laments. Now, that is not the book of Lamentations. Okay, so after Jeremiah, in the book of Jeremiah, there is Lamentations, which is a 5-chapter little book. But that is not that. Okay. So most people I've read would say quite emphatically, that's not Lamentations. Okay, that is another book. Okay.
That we don't have.
We don't have. No. Now, which brings up an interesting sort of thing. In Chronicles, there is cited 19 different documents of different things that people have written. Some of them have been written by, likes of Isaiah, likes of Jeremiah, but it was other literature that they wrote that we don't have anymore. There was chronicle sort of information, books of the kings of Judah and Israel, the books of Israel, but there's 19 different things, 19 different documents. So so the laments is one of those 19 documents. So and just the last line now, the rest of the acts of Josiah and his goodness, okay, according to what was written in the law of the Lord, and his deeds from first to last, indeed are they written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. Now that we do have, that's called Kings, First and Second Kings. Okay, so that is what is referred to as the book of the kings of Israel and Judah, because it covers Israel and Judah. So whereas there is a book out there that covers just the book of just the kings of Israel, not Judah. So that's a book that was lost to history. So so anyway, that is Josiah then.
So really at the end, you know, even though he meddled and it caused his death, people still respected him
Yeah.
for what he had done
Yes.
down through the years.
Yeah, yeah. So I think this is just a sad episode.
Yeah.
It obviously he bought the farm over the head of it,
Mhm.
but at least at the end of it, he is remembered for his goodness.
Mhm.
He operated according to what was written in the law of the Lord, and so on. So people lamented for him because it was a good king.
But yet his meddling is a good example, you know, it's a good lesson for us
Yeah.
today.
Sure. So and what this demonstrates to me is how important the likes of Kings and Chronicles are.
Yeah.
Because you have all these examples of different people doing different things. Some of it's good, some of it's bad.
Mhm.
So, but you can learn from all this.
It's so relevant.
Yeah.
To the book of the Old
Yeah.
Testament.
So now the last chapter that we'll be looking at next week, which is chapter 36, is the end of Second Chronicles. My goal is to get through that. Now there's 4 kings talked about, but one king reigns for 3 months, which was just escaped me, but anyway. And then there's Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and then Zedekiah.
Can I ask you one
Yeah.
question? Josiah, I know the way he was shot with the arrow.
Mhm.
Would he been with the Lord then?
I think so. I think he in good
No.
faith,
Yeah.
I think in good faith,
Yeah.
he was looking at this situation because he didn't understand all the ins and outs and the details of what was going on. He probably perceived it as some kind of a threat to his own security.
Right.
So he felt, well, I need to protect my nation, and God wants to protect our nation. So we need to be proactive in this and go and do this. Now, he's then listening to this unsaved king, basically, this pagan king, say, don't be messing with me because you're meddling with God. And he could be saying, I get on. Yeah. But it's very clear that he did not heed the words of Nico from the mouth of God.
Yeah.
So,
It's truly.
so what we have to run with is what's written.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what's important in Bible study and reckoning with these things is you take what you find.
Yeah.
Because you could stand up here and surmise and conjecture and think, well, what was he thinking? I had no idea what he was thinking.
Yeah.
You know why? Because we're not told. We're not told what he thought. So how can you, I can't know what you're thinking unless you tell me.
Yeah.
I can't read your mind.
Yeah.
Devil can't even read your mind either. So the only way that, the devil knows what you're thinking is by what you say and what you do.
Praise God, only God knows.
That's right. So anyway, the end of Second Chronicles deals with these 4 kings. They reign 3 months, 11 years, 3 months and 10 days, and another 11 years set. And they're all bad.
Oh, dear.
Okay, so they're all real headers when it comes to anything decent. So they are then carried away into captivity by Babylon for a period of 70 years. So we'll look at each of those kings briefly. I don't want to. You could end up going into Jeremiah and talking excessively about some of these kings, what they did and didn't do, and then the judgments. But there's 52 chapters more, right? So hopefully we'll get that done next week, and then that'll be Second Chronicles done. Okay, so then the next thing we'll be doing after that is what I've called the settings of John.
Mhm.
So I've been researching that and looking at that. So that will be, I think, nice and refreshing because it'll be very substantially different. But it'll be, going through the likes of in John, there's 7 miracles,
Mhm.
there's 7 I am statements, there's the 7 Aramaic translations, there's the 7 apostles that are named by name, there's the 7 witnesses, and there's the 7 acts of the Holy Spirit, and there's a whole variety of 7 things, which are kind of neat. So. So however long that takes, I don't know.
Doesn't matter.
And then after that, we'll get on with 1 Corinthians. So that'll be fun. So I haven't even started doing my research with that. I just know that that's where the Lord is taking me. So anyway, so that's us.